I'm on the tail end of a pretty nasty cold right now, so I apologize if I'm not as high energy as I usually am. But I think today is unofficially, going to be the day that we get to break in my 350 small block that's in my square body Chevy. But there are a couple of preliminary things that we got to check off the list before we can go ahead and do the break-in. Obviously, the big glaring one is hooking up the cooling system so this thing is able to get up to operating temperature during the 30-minute process of the break-in. Another thing we got to do is hook up the power steering lines to the power steering pump so that it's not just spinning dry. And once this thing does get up to operating temperature, I'm sure we're going to have to do a little bit of tuning on the carburetor to get it to run nice and smooth during the break-in period, and we can ensure that we're at the optimal RPM to make sure that this flat tappet camshaft in this motor survives the break-in. Break-in, break-in, break-in.
So then let's get to work. This is our final push for getting this engine rebuild 100% complete. We're gonna start by hooking up our power steering pump. First the soft line, which is our return hose from our steering gear, and then we can attach the hard line, which is our pressure line for the steering box. And with the system sealed, we can add our power steering fluid.
Only the good stuff, baby.
Back in the day, this truck definitely would have used ATF for the power steering fluid, but I like using a high quality dedicated power steering fluid these days just because it's 100% easier to bleed the system out. It doesn't foam up like ATF used to. Next on the checklist is installing our clutch fan. First, let's loosen the accessory belt off. This just prevents pressure on the bolts as you're installing and removing them. There is a chance that you could damage the threads on the bolt, or even worse, on the water pump pulley. Then we can go ahead and install our clutch fan here. I know it's super ugly on the front of this nice cleaned up motor, but this is just temporary for now. We are going to be going with an entirely new fan clutch setup for this build. But for now, this one will do just fine, and it'll provide the cooling that we need. After all of those bolts are all tightened up, we can move on to installing the front rad support. If I were to do this again, I probably would have called in some help. Lifting the rad support up into place wasn't a big deal, it was just making sure that everything lined up. I did struggle quite a bit with this process, ended up actually having to use a jack and some wood to get everything to line up how I wanted it to, but eventually I got the fender and the rad support to line up, and I could bolt everything together. I am planning on leaving the other fender off for now, just because the only thing that it really houses is the washer fluid stuff, which obviously we don't need until we get this thing totally back together. Now it's time for the fixins. First, we're going to slide down and install our radiator. Again, this setup is entirely temporary. The previous owner that did the engine swap on this thing originally had a list of janky things, and I think the radiator mount, and the fan shroud was at pretty much the top of the list of this, because you guys are going to see it's pretty janky. When I first got this truck, the radiator was mounted in a way where I couldn't even take the cap off because it was so tight to the rad support. Once the rad's in place, we can go ahead and hook up the hoses. First, we're going to hook up the lower radiator hose, which attaches to the bottom of the water pump. Next, we're actually going to remove this upper radiator hose, since I did buy the proper one for this truck. But before we do install the new upper radiator hose, I'm going to put this fan shroud in place while I have some room. And as you can see, the fan shroud and the holder for the fan shroud and radiator just doesn't quite make sense. I ended up having to build some standoffs just so I could get the cap off and fill the radiator. But again, all of this stuff is temporary and I'm only using it for the break-in procedure. There is one thing I'm going to take credit for here though, and that is using this window seal off of a Volkswagen to fill the gap in order to get some air going through this radiator. Sometimes even I surprise myself with my genius. Next up, we can go ahead and install this upper radiator hose that doesn't look like a vacuum cleaner hose. And yes, I know, constant tension clamps are better than gear clamps. But you know what else is better than gear clamps? Having all my fingers and my eyes. Because everybody in here knows what happens when one of those constant tension clamps slips and goes flying across the shop. Now that the upper and lower radiator hoses are attached, it's time to attach the heater core lines. The first one also attaches to the top of the radiator near the filler neck, and the other one attaches to a port on the intake. As you can see here, our overflow bottle is in a little bit of disrepair. It's not looking the greatest on the inside. So before we go any further, I think we're gonna try and get this one cleaned up, because tomorrow we're gonna come back and get this thing started up again. I am, however, going to fill the cooling system I'm actually going to do a pressure test on the cooling system really quick to make sure everything's good to go there. I've just got the overflow port capped off, as you can see here, because I do want to let this thing sit overnight and gravity bleed the cooling system so that we know we're not going to run into any issues as far as airlocks and stuff like that goes. And with the system completely sealed, it's now time to finally add our antifreeze. Although this truck doesn't get driven in the winter, it does get stored in a non-heated place, and here in Canada, it gets down to pretty dang cold in the winter time. So I like to run about a 60-40 coolant to water mix. Anybody who's had their coolant freeze on them in the middle of the winter knows it's not a good time. And this is when I discovered my first grave mistake. Yes, that's right. We had a coolant leak. And even sitting here right now, I don't know why. I thought it was maybe possible that it didn't put enough sealant on the bottom left bolt for the water pump, which goes into a cooling jacket. But when removing the bolt, the coolant seemed to stop. So I don't know if it was a coincidence that it reached that level where it was sitting in the water pump right as I was pulling the bolt out. But I pulled the bolt out, no coolant continued to flow. I put some more thread sealant on the bolt, as well as a washer, like a copper washer on the bolt, to make double sure that it's not going to leak again. Reinstalled it, and then it was time to perform a pressure test. Alright, it's been about 15 minutes, and if the pressure is holding, and the system is holding now, then this gauge should be exactly where we left it. And as you can see, it is. So, that's a good sign. We officially have a sealed cooling system. We just had to sacrifice a little bit of paint. It is the next day, and we've got our coolant overflow tank all cleaned up. It's definitely not perfect, but it is a hell of a lot better than it was before we cleaned this thing. As you can see, it is cracked in a couple of spots. Luckily, the only cracks are at the top there, where it doesn't really matter because the level is kind of staying on this half right here. But we are going to try and order a new bottle for this thing. But for now, to do the break-in, let's get this bottle in the truck. What do you know? Another temporary solution to get this thing through its break-in. We're only going to install one bolt on this coolant bottle, as like I said, I'm planning on buying another one. We're going to fill this up to the cold mark. After the bottle is installed and filled, just one more hose to hook up to the radiator, and the cooling system is 100% complete and functional. The cooling system is officially 100% hooked up and leak-free at this moment. And I've also went ahead and installed my little filler adapter to here. We're actually not going to put any coolant in this at the moment. The rad is full, and sometimes when these things, the thermostats are being weird or sticky or something like that, the coolant will actually start to come up into this funnel. So until I know that that thermostat is opening properly, I'm not going to add any fluid to this funnel. But with that being said, I think it's time, guys. Let's pull this thing a little bit forward so that we're not going to burn up anything with the exhaust. And let's go for a break-in. Breaking in an engine's camshaft is one of the most important things when you first install it. Performing a proper break-in procedure is one of the key factors in the life of the camshaft. It also creates a wear pattern on the lifters to make sure that everything is going to run smooth for years to come. This is especially important on flat tappet camshafts, an older school design that requires a more careful break-in procedure. In this engine, I've installed the Comp Cams, not a sponsor, Extreme Energy Cam and Lifter Kit. It's got an advertised duration of 274, 286, and a lift of 487, 490. It's pretty much the highest lift camshaft you can put in on a stock valve train. Every camshaft manufacturer's break-in procedure is slightly different, but for the most part, they will recommend some sort of period of time that you have to run the engine at a higher RPM to sustain the proper oil pressure and oiling for the camshaft for proper break-in. But before you perform the break-in procedure, you need to select a proper break-in oil. As you saw in the last video, I'm using Lucas's 30 weight break-in oil. Most companies make a high zinc break-in oil specifically for breaking in engines. To accompany this, we're also going to add our own zinc additive on top of this. This is also from Lucas Oils. As far as the actual break-in procedure goes, Comp recommends an RPM of 2000 to 2500 RPM for 30 minutes. The break-in procedure specifically says slower engine speeds will not supply the camshaft with an adequate amount of oil for the break-in period. After this 30-minute break-in, they want you to drain the oil and change the filter, and if you're using a double valve spring setup, reinstall the second valve spring. Like I said, we are on stock valve train right now, so we didn't have to do that step. We will be following this break-in procedure exactly how the camshaft manufacturer wants it. So a couple things before we fire this thing up for the break-in. Number one, it is pretty cold out today, which means welcome to Canada. The shop is cold. We're sitting at about 1 degree Celsius at the moment. So with this truck being carbureted and the tune on the carburetor being set for a summer tune, because I don't drive this thing in the winter time, it might struggle to start and rev right up to that 2,500 RPM that we're aiming for. But I have combated this. We've had the heater running on here, kind of acting as a block heater and to warm the oil up and warm the block up and everything else. I also specifically chose a straight 30 weight oil for this reason. And the last thing to note is we are definitely going to get some smoke off of the exhaust, just because I've had my greasy paws all over the headers and the other stuff on the exhaust. So if you see smoke, don't be alarmed. That's pretty normal for something like this. We are actually going to have to open the shop doors, obviously, since we're running this on the inside of the shop. So hopefully we can stay warm enough to monitor everything, and hopefully everything goes smooth. So without further ado, here we go, guys. All right, here goes nothing. Contact. And that is the reason why I put that on there. I don't know if you can hear that noise right now, but that's my carbon monoxide alarm going crazy in there. So I'm just kind of chilling outside, waiting for the levels to come back down to normal. Ain't nobody want to be dying from carbon monoxide poisoning today, I'll tell you that much. But I guess I can talk about it. So there's obviously good news and there's bad news with that break-in that you guys just saw. The good news is the break-in went pretty flawlessly as far as getting the thing up to temperature. The thermostat opened. We've varied the RPMs from 2,000 to 2,500 RPM according to comp. That's what they want in order to splash different parts of the camshaft. That's what they say anyways. So we did that. Every once in a while we ran back in, changed the RPM between 2,000 and 2,500 RPM, and everything went pretty smooth. Now, at close to the end of the 30-minute period, we were seeing a little bit higher coolant temps. Like, it wasn't overheating, but it was creeping up a little bit. But, I mean, you run anything at 2,500 RPM for 30 minutes, it's going to struggle to keep up. Now, with that being said, I do have a clutch fan on that thing for regular rotation. And obviously the clutch fan is going to work, but instead of the fan blades pulling air through the rad right now, they're actually pushing air through the rad, which is fine for the break-in when you're not moving. But obviously I'm going to have to deal with that issue in the future, get the right fan for this thing, and go from there. The bad news is we did discover a couple of other problems while we were doing the break-in. I don't know if you guys could tell, but I literally had to force the lever on the carburetor to a lower position because I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but the cable on the truck right now is adjusted improperly, or it's not set properly to the cable bracket that I bought. So the minimum RPM that it was running at was 2,000. I couldn't get it any less than that. So in order to get it back down to idle, we got to adjust that cable. And hopefully there's enough adjustment there that I don't have to buy another bracket for it. Thirdly, I don't know if you guys could hear over the roar of the engine or if it came through on video, but the belt is making a ton of noise. Now, we didn't lose the belt, which is what I was worried about, but the belt is making a ton of noise. So we'll have to see if it got chewed up at all. I basically just shut the truck off and came right out here because, like I said, I don't want carbon monoxide poisoning on the Saturday before the holidays, you know. So we'll see if the belt got chewed up at all. We can try and make some adjustments, but if this thing's going to be that finicky, I've already played around with it for too many hours of messing around with it and having to buy multiple things. I should have just went out and bought a properly made serpentine belt kit, which might be the plan for the future if I can't get this belt squeal sorted out. Overall, I'm pretty stoked on how the camshaft break-in went as far as the actual break-in procedure. Now is the moment of truth. So now that I just ran it for 30 minutes above 2000 RPM, what they say is change the oil, put a new filter on it, and it should be good to go. But your boy obviously wants to know if the camshaft broke in properly. So we're gonna drain the oil out of it, see how the oil looks, and then more importantly, pull the filter off and do a filter cut and see if there's any crap in the pleats of the filter or at the bottom of the filter itself. That's going to be the scariest part of this process, because if I went through all this effort and the camshaft is not wearing in how it should, going to be a real bummer. But with that being said, I am going to make you guys wait till the next video for that. Unfortunately, we're out of time today, so we're not going to be able to drop the oil. I also want to put it on the hoist so we can button up a couple other things while we're doing the oil stuff. So that's going to have to wait for the next video. So subscribe to the channel if you're not already, to see if my engine survived or not, because at this point, I don't even know. It did sound healthy even at the end when I shut it off. You could hear that it was doing a little bit of dieseling when I did shut the key off, and I think that's just to do with the fact that we haven't exactly set ignition timing properly yet, and it was pretty hot. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned to see if we got to undo all the work that we just did putting this engine in. Peace out.